Good morning. It's Friday, January 8th, 2021, and it is 9:04 a.m. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website. Agenda item 1, call to order. The January State Board meeting will now come to order. Agenda item 1, Andrea, please call the roll.
Patty Googles,
Present.
Jacqueline Morrison, here. Deborah Neary,
Present.
Patsy Kojohns,
Here.
Lisa Fricke,
Here.
Maureen Nichols,
Here.
Robin Stevens,
Here.
Patricia Tam,
Yes.
Commissioner Bloomstead.
Here.
All present.
Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 1.2, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda item 1.3, information regarding the Open Meetings Act is posted as you enter the room from the main hallway doors. The Open Meetings Act is also posted on the State Board of Education's website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Live web streaming will be available through the State Board of Education website, www.education.ne.gov/stateboard. Board members, please engage your microphones before speaking and turn them off when you are done speaking. And please turn off your cell phones. Thank you. Agenda item 1.4, COVID-19 meeting protocol. Ryan Four.
I don't have anything to add different from yesterday, and the protocol's posted in Spark.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is public comment period. And as of this moment, we have no public comment or written comment or special presentation. Agenda item 3, the 2021 organization of the State Board of Education. Agenda item 1, 3.1. Before we begin the election of officers, I would like to call to your attention that the officers elected at this meeting will serve a 1-year term. Next, I would like to request a motion, a 4-part motion, indicating that the commissioner, as secretary of the State Board, will preside over the nomination and election process, that secret ballots will be used during the election, that the results of each round of voting will be announced by the teller and recorded in the minutes, after which the commissioner will declare the result, and that the ballots and tally sheets will be placed in the custody of the commissioner, who will keep them under seal until the time period for a recount expires, and then will destroy them. Do I hear a motion to this effect? Motion made by Patty.
Second.
Who seconded that?
I did.
Pat. Thank you. I hereby appoint Scott Summers and Laura Seipel as tellers to disseminate and count the ballots. The commissioner will now preside over the nomination and election process. Commissioner Bloomstead.
Thank you. And as I say every year at this time, this is the one time a year you let me try to transact business with you, and it's my least comfortable part of the job. So thank you for hanging in there. Nominations are now open for president of the State Board of Education. According to Robert's Rules of Order, no seconds are required for nominations. A member may nominate himself or herself. Votes may be cast for any current member of the State Board, even if they are not nominated. Are there any nominations? Yes.
I would like to nominate Maureen Nichols for the 2021 presidency. Or the 2021 presidency.
Are there any further nominations? See no further nominations. Board members, or nominations are now closed. Board members are reminded that a majority of votes cast is required for an election. Abstentions and blank ballots do not count as votes cast. Illegible ballots, ballots with multiple names, or ballots for anyone other than a current state board member are not credited to any candidate. So the tellers can actually deliver you the ballots.
And my annual joke, these are the ballots. The Board of Ed ballot president, name blank. The name is the person you nominate, not your name. Unless you're nominating yourself. Voting for yourself, voting.
Okay.
I don't want to rush anybody if they're thinking, but I'll go around and collect them and you can wave them out if you're still thinking.
Sorry about that second. I needed a second.
Oh, that's okay.
We tallied the total votes and we have 8 votes for Maureen Nichols for president.
So I guess congratulations is what I'll say, but the president of the State Board of Education for the year of 2021 is Maureen Nichols. We'll proceed. Nominations are now open for vice president. According to Robert's Rules of Order, no seconds are required for nominations. A member may nominate himself or herself. Votes may be cast for any current member, even if they're not nominated. The floor is open for nominations.
Madam President.
Actually, you'll,
Oh, excuse
you
me.
get to, this is the only time you have
That's
to worry
right.
about me,
That's
Robin.
right. I thought maybe we'd moved you out right away then.
I see how it goes.
Commissioner, I move that we nominate Patsy Co-Johns for vice president for the 2021 term.
All right, thank you, Robin. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, nominations are now closed. Board members are again reminded that a majority of the votes cast is required for an election. Abstentions and blank ballots do not count as votes cast. Illegible ballots, ballots with multiple names, or ballots for anyone other than a current state board member are not credited to any candidate. So the tellers may go ahead and deliver the ballots.
Kelly reveals 8 votes for Vice President for Patsy Co-Johns.
Again, congratulations to the Vice President of the State Board of Education for the year 2021 is Patsy Johns. Congratulations. And it's with my pleasure to be able to turn this back over to Maureen. One thing we have scheduled a 15-minute break. So depending on whether or not you want to take a little bit of time to do that, I see that discuss board committee membership is kind of the next procedural thing, and then we can decide how. You can decide, you can decide how we proceed. So.
Item 3.4 is board membership committee. Your assignment from Ryan yesterday was to fill out the committee sheet and get handed in. If you would have, hopefully each of you have handed yours in to Ryan or the commissioner or Andrea. Okay. Thank you. I don't think there's anything else that we need. You will be known by email as soon as committees are formed. We'll try to get that done as soon as possible. And the chairs of the committees can reach out to the membership of each committee at that point in time. As I did last year, in looking at things, we really tried to work on, if you had a first choice, we looked at your first and second choices and tried to make sure that you at least got one of those if it didn't work out to give you, if everybody wanted the same committee, which happens, it happens. So just know that we will do the best we can in getting the committees that you would like to serve on. I see no need to take a break right now, but I guess I would like to say thank you. As president, thank you for trusting me to be your president for 2021. It's an honor to serve you. And as our commissioner noted yesterday, the work that we do really is the foundation of the country and what we do here in Nebraska. It is so important. And I want to make sure that we may not always agree, but that's what a board is all about. But we come to consensus and we support each other on that consensus when it's made. And I believe when we do that, we are looking out for the best interest of our students, our educators, our communities, and our districts, which is what we are here to do. So thank you for this honor to serve you again this year, and know that you are always open to contact me. I may not get back to you right away because I don't live by my phone or I don't always live by my phone, let's put it that way. I do check my email regularly, so just know that I will get back to you soon. But thank you. Patsy, did you want to say anything?
I would like to thank you as well for trusting me for another year. I'll do my very best to support Maureen in everything that she does, and to also be there for you if you need to talk to me. One of the greatest compliments that I ever had in my whole life was from a young man that was far younger than I am. And he was in college and he belonged to our speech and theater organization. And one day he came up to me and he said, "You're a great follower as well as a great leader." And he said that I think that's wonderful that you can do that, because lots of people can't do that. And I've always taken that to heart and known that the people behind the scenes, the vice presidents and the members of the board, Our jobs are every bit as important, and it's important that we do them well and we honor the leadership positions that we've been given, whether they're the chairman or the president or whatever, and whether we're the quiet person in the background giving advice. So I promise to do my best doing that. And if you need me, I'm here. And I don't live by my phone either, although I felt like it during COVID, but I will answer and respond. Thank you guys very much.
Lisa?
I just wanted to say this has been an unusually tough year with COVID and the order that we had to go through. And I think you both did an excellent job as a team in keeping us informed, in addition to working with the commissioner. It was, I'm sure, very tough at times as leaders, but you came through for all of us and for the students of Nebraska. And I thank you both.
Thank you, Lisa. I just want to add for our two newest members. This past year, Patsy and I, we worked very closely together. Mutt and Jeff, I don't know what you want to call us, but we do. We collaborate, and that's truly who I am. I like to collaborate because I need ideas. I need suggestions. I need others to hear and to say, Maureen, I don't think that's a good idea. And Patsy's not afraid to do that. So please know that we will continue to collaborate together. Okay, we are going to proceed to Patsy?
And we both have chainsaws, and that's the truth.
That's kind of an inside joke.
That's frightening. That's just frightening.
Okay, agenda item 5, the commissioner's report and overview. Commissioner Bloomstead, 5.1.
Yeah, first of all, just thanks. Obviously, this meeting's a little different than our meetings will be in kind of normal rotation through the rest of the year, as we discussed yesterday, as kind of the routines go. But the consent agenda, just generally, I thought it'd be worth spending just a minute or two on what that's for, why that's there, how we work it. The procedures really are, any item that's put on consent agenda is something that's kind of a routine business or a contract renewal or an opportunity really to kind of expedite our business, so we can spend our time when we're a collective body on the things that are probably most important for the moment. Obviously, we use a committee process as well, and so those decisions that are otherwise either on the consent agenda or not have always really come through committee. We've included some other items on the agenda today that we put out there, even though they would have maybe in normal routine gone to a committee and still been on consent agenda. We put them out there for further discourse if you wanted to have any additional information. We didn't plan for staff presentations on them. They are fairly routine. I was going to say, I think I can answer those questions. That's maybe not quite true, but at least we can get those questions answered for you in the setting that we have today. The consent agenda normally, if you would see something that you would want removed, you would fill out the form, which I would lose what color is it these days, what color the form is, but that form normally you'd be able to fill out and say, hey, look, and give that to Scott Summers and say, I'd like to remove an item from the consent agenda for further discussion. So our intention is always to give you that chance if there's something that you see that you have would have further questions on. Often we run into something that's on there that we might be able to address as a question for you as board members in advance, and we're happy to do that too. So that process is really intended to expedite our work while we have that chance to be able to do it and kind of prioritize the conversations that we're able to have in the board setting. The other part of the process, if you look at the consent agenda, we break it into kind of the big categories, and I should have just pulled that up so I could look at the big categories that we have, like today, for instance. So an example is state board out-of-state travel approval. So we have a process for that. It goes on consent agenda. It's usually reviewed by the finance committee as part of the committee process. Committee appointments being another. And actually, we continue to work and try to find different ways that we can make that committee process in alignment with your equity principles, in alignment with other things. And so today there's an item on that front. contract approvals, again, like I described, this is actually a renewal type of a contract, as is those things there. Typically, there might be grant approvals on there. There's none, for instance, today. Lease approvals when we're entering into leases, and so you can see there actually is that, but that's routine business as we normally see it. We don't, I guess the spaces that we have in other places. Actually, this one deals with our voc rehab spaces on North 27th Street. So routine business that's already been reviewed by committees or been reviewed by this board in the past. So generally, and I guess there's a miscellaneous, there's always something that doesn't fit one of those categories. So in this case, that is there as well. So I put those things just in front of you for your knowledge about what that process is, always welcoming questions, thoughts on anything that ends up on the consent agenda. And then generally just across the agenda, that's our hope is just to really have you feel like you're well informed about the things that are there. So that's what I described for you underneath 5.1. I don't know if folks had any questions on that front, but
I just want to share, there was a couple of times that I had questions about consent agenda items, and I thought, well, we need to pull these. Well, after I let them know, they talked to me, I had a much better understanding of everything, and we didn't need to pull it. But there have been times when it's been pulled because further discussion needed to take place, clarification. So don't hesitate. But many times the consent agenda items basically need clarification for you, and that can be done without pulling them then.
So I'll move on to the report on rules, and there's really a report in there, but there is no report. There aren't any rules currently in process between everything that we've approved has been approved ultimately by and through the process of the Attorney General and the Governor thus far. So as we have new ones, that routine will be, just so I can give you an update on where we're at in those processes, especially after you've reviewed and approved a rule to be moved into that arena. The strategic plan report, the only thing I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is a bit of a reminder from what the strategic plan committee did at the last meeting, December meeting. So as we were trying to close out the year, it's typical that our committees kind of say, here's the work that we did in the committee and here's what we want to be able to accomplish. Normally this year would be our review of the strategic plan where we're at. We try to do a 2-year review. This has been, as Lisa described already, a fairly unusual year on where we're at. We are actually, as an agency, going to continue to actually do some of that review of the strategic plan, but a little bit differently than what had been laid out within the original protocols. And this is what we discussed back in December. The strategic planning committee, and I think the board voted on it in December, to say, let's delay that review for a year. Here's what I'm going to take as an opportunity for the new committee coming in that will be reviewing the strategic plan to kind of review where we're at. I think we know a lot of the things that didn't get done or got done or were impacted by the pandemic. But I think it's really important that we spend some time thinking about how this pandemic and how coming out of this and the recovery impacts our strategic plan. So there's a lot of strategic plan work to do. It really does guide the direction that we've had as an agency, as we've had as a board. But I do think it's very much, and I think really important as we have 2 new board members coming on, to spend some of that time digging into that, and not hopefully in a painful way. Sometimes that becomes painful, but I think actually for us to get back to that high level, what do we want to make sure that we're getting accomplished in the midst of a pandemic, but ultimately to put back on track the things that we wanted to get accomplished over the long haul. So I hope that makes sense to you. That will be the direction that we go. There's a lot of talk right now about what are our impacts for our students and our for our learning across the state of Nebraska. And actually, because of other things we've done as a board and as an agency on student assessment and understanding the impacts that we're seeing right now, that's going to be critical work for us. So I anticipate that will be hitting us very soon. Next month, I would anticipate spending some time understanding what data we do have available on the impacts of the pandemic. The other thing that I would say on the strategic plan, we have tried to align resources that come to us from federal sources, state resources, otherwise, to make sure it gets aligned underneath those key areas. So our budget is aligned underneath strategic plan. All those efforts are really important that they happen. As you may note, we obviously just saw a huge new stimulus package pass. Our strategic plan over the next 2 weeks is going to be a big driver of us making sure that we're communicating to schools about the focus areas that this board and that we've adopted generally can be met in the midst of the pandemic. The federal resources are substantial in the sense it's about $250 million. That's the round number that I have for the state that will be distributed through the Title Poverty Program. There's some other funds coming. My conversations generally at a national level indicate that there may be other things that come as far as investments. We don't want to waste those investments. We want to make sure that they're going in places that are going to have true impact for the recovery of academic recovery, for the advancement of learning for our students, for addressing the challenges that we face. So a lot of work to do, but exciting work in some ways. I think there's opportunities within that construct right now, and we really want to take that seriously. And your vision and direction helps guide that work. So thank you for that. And that's what I have on the strategic plan, and glad to take comments, questions. Yeah.
Pat?
Last spring, because of the COVID thing, we put in place some waivers on reporting that schools have to do. It's a little hard to have a fire drill if you don't have kids in the building. And so what do you anticipate this spring? I am assuming you're reviewing those waivers and to see what we will keep and what we won't.
Yeah, and obviously, as we're kind of still in the midst of it, but where schools, a couple different things happened. Obviously, if you go back to, and it seems like forever ago, but back in last June where we adopted, well, I'll even go back to April. Our real initial push was how are we going to do continuity of learning in an environment where we were actually being told to keep students out of school buildings, right? I mean, that's what ended up happening. That had huge impacts on students and families. We don't know what all those impacts necessarily are. Our schools asked for guidance around how to continue to manage in those environments, and we provided a lot of different things. On our Launch Nebraska website, of course, you can see the types of guidance that we put out over that period of time. The impacts of this are substantial, right? The impacts for us to think about, we provided lots of flexibility, good, bad, and otherwise, is the reality. The reality, I think, we know each one of those flexibilities has a downside relative to the impact on students or teachers or the overall system, or even for us, quite frankly, as we have to kind of unravel those things. And so that will be part of that work. Schools on the accreditation side of the equation, we've been very flexible, or tried to be very flexible with the types of rules and regs that you mentioned, but we've probably been less flexible than some schools want and more flexible than others, right? So there is no happy medium sometimes that you're able to get into that environment. We will end up having to have, and this is, again, part of this board's work around accreditation. And another thing maybe that ties to that strategic plan committee's work, actually, quite frankly, is where do we go with accreditation in light of what we now know about the impacts of the pandemic? Right. So there is a lot of unraveling to do, and a lot of, or maybe raveling, I don't know, is that right? Whichever way that goes. But the reality is there's a lot to sort through. And each school district, probably each school building, each classroom, each student has impacts at a different level that we're going to have to systemically begin to address.
Thank you.
Lisa?
Just one of the things for our new members. Oh,
I do that too, forgot. Was when we had discussions about things that weren't like improving or, the learning. It was more about the innovative things that are happening now that we could carry over to rule with flexibility. And so I that's a positive that I hang on to, that there are great things going out. And we've discussed that before, not only the waivers, but also innovative things that we can use for the future. So I like positive things. I just wanted to share that.
Madam President.
Robin?
And as you're talking, I'm looking at what was given to us again, and we've seen numerous times, which is what we call the strategic vision and direction. So, and you may or may not know really the answer to this, but as I hear you talk, Commissioner, am I to take then that you are going to use that document as a guiding principle for the direction as to how the 250 million will be spent? And obviously, I'm sure that you're not going to see all 250 million. I have a feeling that's probably going some other places.
Right.
Do you have any idea as to how much of that 250 million will be the responsibility of the department, the responsibility of the board?
Yeah, so
And then I will have another question after this, Madam President, too.
yeah, so what I will and I could probably find the exact numbers for you, but I'll use rough numbers for this purpose. The $250 million of that, essentially 90% of it goes out to school districts underneath the title poverty perspective, and underneath the law. It's very broad in how it can be used. And so one thing that, as we look at this, and I think our schools from the previous stimulus funds that came, the CARES Act funds that came prior, we tried to ask them what did they need the funds for, so we could create a process to help streamline their ability to be able to use those funds in those particular areas. I think this time will be similar. We'll build around that. We weren't required, by the way, to submit another application to the U.S. Department of Education to qualify for these funds. They're actually putting it in essentially underneath our prior application. So the good part is we've actually done some of that work to align it with where we thought the strategic plan part was important. I think the difference now is we can't necessarily anticipate that there will be a lot more funds for education in the recovery moments time. Maybe they'll come, maybe they won't. This is, again, it's a substantial amount of money over the next 2 years that schools are able to use this for. I think our schools will ask us for further guidance on what should we use it for. So they don't want to end up in a trap of spending something that wasn't appropriate, and then we have to go back and redo that. And with federal funds, I do anticipate with the transition of the administration that there will be some other strings that could be part of this process that we don't yet know what they are. So we're trying to anticipate those things as best we can, build really solid processes to distribute those funds to schools. The other 10% is reserved for the Department of Education to provide for a statewide thing. Now, so the other 10%, $25 million, right? So over the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at where can we have the most substantial impacts. The prior amount of money that was there, we used around technology, instructional supports, for, I guess, one like specifically. In fact, we published, I don't get it to the full board. We actually published where those funds went and for what purposes and how we use them. One portion of the funds also went, for instance, like as we've tried to do the campaign to help people understand the importance of masking, and we spent funds in a lot of different ways. All of Launch Nebraska, the intersections with public health, and trying to get expert support on those fronts. So there's been a whole litany of those things. Obviously, this turns out to be about 4 times the amount of money available to us. And I also don't think that we have to, it's not that work for us as a state is different now, in my view, about this need to actually focus on recovery. I'm very worried about special ed students in the state of Nebraska that have not been able to be served in their kind of regular expectations of IEPs. I'm very worried about students in their 10th, 11th, 12th grade years of, what we lost. If you noted, I know there was an article even written on it about graduation rates, actually for the first time slipping in Nebraska last spring, not terribly surprising in the midst of that. I do believe things like that we're going to have to think differently about adult basic education coming out of this pandemic, to think about ensuring that our students that maybe were negatively impacted in the midst of this, didn't finish high school, have that. Talking to our schools about, we have a responsibility to age 21, and that's not just to special ed students. Sometimes that gets intermingled with that. That is to every student who has not completed their high school degree. There is an opportunity for us to think about that with schools. I think it's going to be necessary to expand learning opportunities, summer, and thinking about things that will make a real difference for schools. We're going to have a lot of teachers extremely burned out.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of ways that how do we expand in a workforce that could be shrinking due to the pressures that they have, right? Those are all conversations. I think we're going to set the basic framework, and then the board's role, my role, I think, in helping steer, hey, look, these are good approaches to this. And then we're going to have to, in some way, and I don't mean accountability measurement, by the way, I just mean measure our progress towards addressing that pandemic need. And that's where we're going to go. I mean, that's my intention. And that's why it's actually good to, in my view, kind of build around the strategic plan, while at the same point in time, understand how it's impacting where we thought we would go a few years ago relative to trajectories, and know that we've had impacts that we'll be measuring and sorting through, not just this year, but probably for multiple years. So I do talk a long time, Lisa. That's all I was going to say.
That was just.
Robin, did you have another question?
Yes, and first of all, thank you for that information. The next thing that comes to my mind then, as I hear this, okay, so we have a committee called the Strategic Planning, Performance, and Improvement Committee. Is that the committee that will be asked to become more experts in the areas that you have talked about here?
It will. I mean, and it doesn't mean that it's that committee's work alone, but I think it's fair to say that committee will be asked to help lead on those efforts on behalf of the board. Yes.
Okay. Because I think that as we think about where we're going to serve, that may really influence now how we rank our things here. I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. It will for me. Let's put it that way. And if I may, one more question. We've talked a lot in here about Rule 10. What committee deals? I understand what you say, that we all deal with Rule 10, but what committee will be most responsible for the updates in Rule 10?
So your favorite committee now. Strategic planning is actually where that's resided, and I'm not mistaken. That we've assigned different parts of things over time to other committees, but that's actually who has been spearheading that. It is a fair point too for us to think maybe later about the division of some of that work in the long run across the board. And so even though we've made those assignments to committees for different reasons, you know, just because we've laid that plan out doesn't mean we shouldn't also think about how to adjust that to accomplish the work we need to accomplish. So,
Commissioner, I think it's worth noting too that actually Rule 10 is called out in the board's bylaws as belonging to that committee.
yeah. So Ryan's reminded me that within the bylaws, that Rule 10 is one of the specific of their scope. But as we've learned with committees, right, there's this chance that, and the relationship between committees. And then I'm just going to say there's probably more full board work to do today than there would have been, you know, when we start these conversations and figuring out how we're going to do that in a little bit different fashion. I think there's going to be some new tricks we're going to have to learn, is what I would say. And that's okay. That's actually very, very good. And I'm very excited for those things to develop.
Madam President, just one last thing. I'll try to be quiet.
For the second time, almost.
No, I really, listening to the commissioner reminds me that, and maybe more for Jacqueline and Patty, I've always appreciated the fact that, okay, the policy committee may have something that is heavily influenced by the AQuest Student and Success. And so they will refer that committee or that policy to that committee. And I've really appreciated that. Once again, just thank you very much for that information. And thank you, Madam President.
Lisa?
Commissioner, when you were talking about the 25 million that goes to other entities, I was worried about the social, as we all are, the social emotional portion, students. We had that problem before COVID, and I can't even imagine how that's compounded. Has any of this money gone to help teachers utilize strategies and, learning how to help kids?
I think it definitely will. Just a clarification, this money is not yet hit for us. This is money we anticipate, right?
Right,
So,
right.
in fact, just on I think Tuesday of this week, at a national call with my colleagues from across the nation and the current, well, not any longer the current leadership of the U.S. Department of Ed, but the leadership of the U.S. Department of Ed to understand how those funds were going to be coming to us and what else has to happen. They knew part of those answers, did not yet know all of those answers. So there's some things to sort out. But to your point about areas in which we need to invest resources, that's a great point. Schools know that we're going to have recovery on the emotional side of this pandemic, the behavioral health of students, the well-being of families, the re-entry in some cases of students who haven't been in classrooms for whatever of the things, the impacts that may have happened. So, those are areas that we're definitely highlighting as ways to not just for the 25 million that might be something that we can help direct, but also to work with school districts to think about how we build capacities for the long haul on that front. We've had other grants around behavioral and mental health that we worked with Health and Human Services. We worked with school districts. In fact, I do know that we've been working with Senator Walls, as that's been one of her interest areas over the last several weeks and months. So I have not yet spoken with her since she was elected chair, but I anticipate that will remain a high priority for her. So we'll look at how we can leverage these funds and the availability of these funds in areas that not just address the pandemic in the very moment, but the structural pieces that could help us, I think, for the long haul too. So.
Was it in one of our conferences, just for the new members, on the mental health side, they talked about ACEs and how that affects kids and what the effects are.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of our conference calls, it said they're looking at COVID mental health as the 11th ACE, adverse for children. And that was a light bulb for me.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And so thanks, Lisa. It's a great point. So.
Right.
Deborah?
Thank you. As we know, the pandemic has hit different students. I mean, there's just been an extreme wide range of experiences. Just in my district alone, I have friends who have gone to our students in Millard Public Schools. And I mean, they've just had an outstanding experience during this, and it doesn't appear as if those students are getting behind, at least the ones I know. But then there's other school districts where, as you say, there's special ed needs that might have gone unmet, and just people that are new to the U.S., so many language challenges that occurred. And do you see using these funds in a way that can help us focus on some equity issues at the same time, because those disparities that were there before the pandemic have widened, as we all know, and that gap is larger. And would you speak to that for a second, please?
Yeah, and I mean, absolutely. And you bring up another great point. So I told staff here, I probably told the board over time, I kind of get tired of admiring the problem, so to say, right? Our achievement gaps for our students that need to be addressed. We know that this pandemic was not a gap narrowing experience for our students. And so therefore, I don't think I have to wait for the measurement of those things to implement the types of strategies that need to be in place to begin to do that. So hence my point about, I just anticipate that there are students, still our 10th graders this year that were 9th graders last year, right? That was not the launch to their post-secondary path, their career path that we would have wanted. And so we're going to I believe we know that there are gaps to be filled on those fronts. I think the notion of addressing our students by race and ethnicity, by English learners, as you mentioned, by understanding that all of those gaps that have been troubling for us, this is a moment in time to think about the innovations that we could make. And if we kind of reflecting back, and it does seem like a decade ago, but last end of July, first part of August, when we did the NDE Day, I mean, our theme really was, looking for innovations in the midst of this disruption, right? And again, that's where I don't think anything is business as usual. And I think everything has to be on the table about how we rethink how we best serve those students and address these gaps. The challenge is shifting where people spend, not just this. It sounds like a huge amount of money, or it's not a huge amount of money in the scope of the work that I think we have ahead of us. When I testified in front of the Senate Health Committee this summer, if you'll recall, there was talk about how much money it actually takes to do this part of the recovery. The analysis that I was part of and advocated for in that hearing would say this is a drop in the bucket for that longer term. And I'm not saying that all happens in 1 year. It happens probably over 3 or 4 years. But we have to move quickly for those students that are at the end of our responsibility. And we have to move quickly for those students that are missing core fundamental, like our earliest readers, right? We actually believe there's that they missed, and maybe just even in the spring, if it was just that, we have recovery to do yet, because core key reading practices that we lost in that gap in time. There's always a reading loss or a learning loss in summers. We're going to have to rethink how we do that. Here's my other concern is our educators are extremely, extremely tired, and we've still got a long semester ahead of us. So we're going to have to start right now in thinking through how we can energize the field, understand where to spend time, probably understand what things we have to take off their plates. And I'm going to call it little things, right? We know more about this pandemic and how to control this virus in school settings than we knew then. We were very much having to guess last summer as to what the things were. I've talked to teachers that are spending a lot of time cleaning surfaces in their rooms, right? I'm not sure the science is there anymore in the same way. I'm not saying some of that's not necessary, but I think you could cut back on half by that and then add up the amount of instruction time that is across the state. I mean, it's substantial, right? So if we start adjusting, and that's what our team is going to be doing, is adjusting to what we now know. I've asked schools to adjust to what they now know, because we also saw strategies that maybe didn't play out so well for hybrid environments. And you see schools now shifting to understand how they could maybe do that better. Special ed, again, we have so much work and recovery to do on that front. Part of these funds could be used for that, but it's just not enough. When you look at probably the underlying expense of adding months of learning time to students, and some students that have lost, they regress and not, there wasn't a chance for them to grow, just depending on what their IEP was or otherwise. So it seems so daunting. Here's where I'm so hopeful. I mean, we can imagine that. We can talk and work so well with schools, I think, across the state to begin to do that recovery work, but we don't have moments really to spare and we don't have capacity to waste. And so, and that becomes really hard because trust me, I'm sure not every superintendent across the state agrees with me on everything that I talk about or everything that I do. But I do hold schools, I guess, to the point that I hold, I guess, my hope is that they want the same things. We might not agree on the exact path to that. So we need to invest resources to ensure that the end result is what we need or what we want. And I think we're there. I mean, I don't think that's a hard conversation. I think the hard conversation is who's going to do what work and how we're going to do it. And then they're going to ask me, what can we take off our plate? And then that's going to come to you as well as part of that strategy. So,
Patsy?
Well, this is going to seem pretty basic, but it's something that I've worried about as I've watched legislation across the United States for our children, and that is nutrition and all the cuts and all the things that we're talking about are null, void without our children having proper nutrition. And it was sketchy here and there. When I was in education, I was providing food for students, had a food locker and that sort of thing. I can't imagine what it is now. So it relates to not only learning, but that teacher stress that they're feeling, because teachers are, most teachers, I'd say almost all teachers are nurturing kind of people. And so they're busy buying all those kind of things and dealing with those problems. And so I guess let's think to the higher things, but let's also remember things like food make a huge difference. And not worrying about whether you're going to be hungry when you go home. And whether you're going to come to school hungry and not really care about what you're learning.
yeah, and I might just add so again, food and nutrition being a big portion of the work that we do at the department relative to the distribution of that. And you'll learn more about this, of course, Dana Brita and then our team on nutrition, Sharon Davis underneath her team. The reality is, so we applied for every waiver and did different things, but we have so many new partnerships today. We started partnerships around feeding back in March with Children and Family Foundation, every Omaha group I can think of, every statewide group we can think of that were at the table talking about how we do food security and how we address that. There are gaps in policy that U.S. Department of Agriculture, number one, I think they recognized that for the most part was appreciative of where they could free that up. But commodity programs that actually ended, by the way, at the end of this year, that we saw a gap. I think we're gonna have to think about schools in a different way about not just feeding the students that are eligible in that setting. We've seen CEP, meaning community eligibility provisions and other things. But I also think we're the source of where family feeding opportunities can be. And we're gonna have to think differently about what types of foods are available for schools to have for the very notions that you have. Backpack programs are wonderful. Our private funders are private. Those have been wonderful things, but I think our needs much bigger than that now. And this is similar to the types of needs that I think we have on behavioral health and mental health and just general well-being for families. So,
Madam President, may I say one more thing? When I was still in schools working, free and reduced lunches were often like at the 40% range, and that was not unusual. And now visiting with teachers and administrators, they're saying 80% range of free and reduced lunch. And it's not just the children who are insecure about food, it's the whole family. So I'm really interested in what you're saying, and we deal with that in ACRES committee. We hear reports on that. So I'll be looking to hear about them.
and again, kind of thinking of the new thing, partnerships. But our work with HHS, how we share data, we've done different things in the midst of this pandemic to help them qualify for funding streams that wouldn't have otherwise been there. It's immense, and I don't have a book in me or whatever, but I wish I could actually tell the stories that are actually happening in the background well enough to give the people credit that are doing all of this work. It's immense, and it's educators, and it's healthcare and community support systems. It's immense right now. So
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Madam President.
Commissioner, I have one easy question for you. So there's 250 million allotted, is that correct?
yeah,
And that's-
roughly, it's slightly under that, I think. And
Oh, okay. And that's to be dispersed over a 2-year period, did I understand you correctly?
yeah, it's dispersed versus expended versus just right in the federal sense, right? It's like you have this much time to draw it down and claim it properly based on the federal requirements. They can spend it faster than the 2-year period of time. So
Anyone else?
I have just one question. How, when deciding, and I'll learn more about this, I'm sure, but when deciding out of the 250, once the 10% is kept, there's 90%. How do we decide which of those COVID funds go to which school districts, or how are those distributed amongst the districts?
yeah, so no, it's a great question. So underneath the federal Title I poverty program, there's a formula allocation, and it's based on poverty students. So poverty schools based on that formula will receive more, and that's our regular distribution every year on or that formula is based on the regular distribution. One change, I'm glad you kind of, if you remember, there was a lot of concern about how there's a equitable services provision in our normal title that goes to non-public schools, which schools and then non-public schools have to kind of manipulate and go through, and it's kind of a laborious process. But there was a lot of tension over that in this last round. Congress passed something that separated that portion of the funds into a different portion of funds I haven't talked about yet that go underneath the gear, and that's the governor's. I'm going to emerge. Oh shoot, I can't remember what gear stands for, but underneath those funds, we'll be working on that. That underneath this new legislation, we're actually still responsible for the distribution of the funds to the non-publics as well. But those are the very similar types of things. But I actually appreciate that they kind of clean that up in the federal language, because it makes it a little cleaner for what public schools get versus what those non-publics get. So
What President Nichols, can I ask the commissioner one other question?
you're so good, Jacqueline.
Go ahead, Jacqueline.
When you say the non-public schools, I know that we saw an increase in homeschooling with the
Yes.
pandemic, and so we haven't really discussed those families, but do those funds also, are they for private schools, or do they also address those families who chose to go?
It doesn't, and I think
Okay.
yeah, it's the funds in underneath that do not address homeschool, and I'm glad you bring that point up, because we have thousands more homeschool students today than we had before. Now, we've seen that some people started out homeschooling, and then once they felt safer, they went back. We've seen people start the school year and decide they're going to homeschool, and then there's school districts that didn't feel probably as able to serve certain students, and there are tensions over that too. So, but I actually truly believe we're responsible for all students, right? So it doesn't matter what setting they're in, we're responsible for all of those students. And I do think there needs to be a conversation about how we at least provide a set of services, and not just for these federal funds, but I think for the long haul around improving access for parents if they're doing that. And I'm not advocating that people would homeschool versus do something else. What I'm advocating for is each one of these students needs the highest quality experience that they can have. And as long as we have the ability to do homeschooling, which I don't anticipate that changing, we just need to be able to provide supports that they would be able to tap into. Digital resources, materials, things along those lines, I think are very important. We've not had those types of supports, and then it is advantageous for us to have those types of partnerships where students that are actually going between different settings that we know that the schools know where they're at and that they've had access to those things. So I think it's a really great point. I don't have all the answers that we might need, but I'm glad you raised that. It's a substantial portion, and it might be a conversation that we need to have. And the governor did try to put funds in the gear funds before that would have allowed homeschoolers to have access to some of the technology. So we actually have managed some of that in that time frame, but there's so much more work there to do. So thank you for that.
Anyone else have a question? Okay.
Moving on to agenda item 5.4, that would be Ryan.
Microphone. Your microphone on, Maureen.
Pardon?
Your microphone.
Nothing from you, Ryan? Okay. Agenda item 5.5, legislative priorities, Deputy Commissioner Halstead.
Good morning, Brian Halstead, Deputy Commissioner. As all of you know, the 107th Legislature first session began on Wednesday.
Brian, we can't hear you very well, so I don't know if there's we'll see if we can adjust here.
Right now.
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Brian Halstead, Deputy Commissioner. As I was saying, all of you know the 107th Legislature first session started on Wednesday, and they organized themselves just like you had to organize yourself this morning. They have started with bill introductions. It is day 3 of a maximum 90-day session, so they are at their jobs doing their work. You have attached in Spark the state board's legislative and regulatory priorities for the next 2 years. That is a document the state board adopted last October. It is the framework for which you, the staff, and the public understand what the state board believes are legislative priorities. What you're saying are your regulatory priorities that you're going to address. And that is probably a document, if you're going to be having any conversations with anybody about bills, you should have that with you or provide that to senators so they understand what the board and the department feel are the priorities. So once again, it's 2021, and unfortunately I do have to live by my phone all the time until June. So Commissioner.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And I would just highlight, it's really worth reviewing that. And again, maybe for Patty and Jacqueline, I mean, the legislative priorities, and I know we discussed this a little bit and kind of as we've brought you on board, but this has actually become a very important document, I think, for us in interacting with the legislature, but also interacting about the set of priorities and that we have as a board to interact, as Robin described earlier, about interactions between committees and how we do that work. And so I guess under Robin's leadership as the legislative committee chair for last year, getting this done is really important. And thanks to Brian and other staff that have worked so hard on this.
Robin?
Thank you, Madam President. And thanks for your kind words, Commissioner. Brian, if you're still there, would you take a moment to explain to, obviously, our new members, but really to all of us, about the difference between legislative priorities and regulatory priorities?
So the board several years ago decided it needed to better communicate to the legislators, the state senators, about the constitutional and legislative authority the board already has and the areas that you're going to be working on, in some ways to make sure they understood they didn't have to bring bills to have state statutes to accomplish some of the subject areas in that regard. So in that regard, you're, as a board in the department, speaking in our regulatory authority, we're already focused on these topics. It also gives an opportunity for the senators to tell you what you should be doing for accreditation or teacher preparation or for those topical areas so that you can carry out that work that's already been assigned to the state board to do by the legislature and the Constitution. The legislative priorities, you're speaking to the legislature, to the public, to all our policy partners. These are the areas of greatest importance that we feel the legislature needs to address. And you'll notice they are not written by bill number, or they are more broad statements to give direction. It also helps everyone understand if, in fact, we show up at a hearing in the legislature as a proponent or an opponent or neutral, because that's how the legislature assigns you to appear. That way we can have a better understanding and they'll understand where we're at from a perspective at a level. So hopefully that answered your question, Mr. Stevens.
Yes, it did. If I may, one more question. Have they selected committee chairs? And if so, do you know, well, specifically, I suppose the education committee, who is that chairperson?
So they did, in fact, on their first day, elect the leadership of the legislature. That includes the speaker. That includes all of the offices over there that have to be appointed by the legislature. They elected the chairs of all of their standing committees on Wednesday. Senator Lynn Walls from Fremont was elected to be the chair of the Education Committee for the next 2 years. This morning on their agenda, they are set to adopt the report for assignment of all senators to all committees of the legislature. So after today, we will know all the memberships of all of the committees and the senators who will be working on those committees of their subject matter jurisdiction.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Does anyone have anything for Brian? Well, I guess that's your report to us, Brian. Okay, he's already left it. Thank you, Brian. Okay, agenda item 6, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Pat?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second. Patty? The motion was made by Pat and seconded by Patty. Per board policy, there is no discussion on the motion to approve the consent agenda. Andrea, please call the roll.
Morrison,
Am I indicating my presence or then I vote in favor of approving?
Gary,
Approve.
Jones,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Googles,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
8 yes.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. Agenda item 7, additional business. Is there a motion on item 7.1?
Madam President, I move to authorize the commissioner to contract with Student One for technology services supporting the Early Childhood Integrated Data System project.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion was made by Robin and seconded by Pat. Is there any discussion on the motion? Robin?
Yeah. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and I think this is Dean's area, is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
Dean and Melody Hobson both, so.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to go from memory here, and I could pull it up, but I think there was what, 4 million total in this area, 4 point some. And I think this is asking for 180,000 of that 4 million. I should probably know this, and I'm sure it's been explained to me, but where does this other substantial amount of money, where is that going?
So, yeah, I'll be glad to try to
Okay.
address it anyway.
Great.
The PDG grant, the preschool development grant, is actually a grant received by Health and Human Services Agency. We were a partner in that particular grant. So there's a development, a team that's been doing that work. Part of what they want us to be able to help accomplish is to, as it says, integrate the data systems, basically to help create some data links between, and critical data links that we've been working on anyway. So this is actually beneficial to us and the vision for what that data system would look like, but to ensure that that data project gets completed, and we're part of the contracted solution, or we're contracting for part of that solution is the way to put it, to accomplish that particular work. So the idea, and just maybe a little more background, every student that enters into the education system in Nebraska ends up in a data system. We want to make sure those systems are connected. So from early childhood all the way, really actually all the way into the post-secondary and career side of the equation. And so so this is good and exciting work, I guess, from that standpoint. Without all of Dean's normal excitement, I don't know how to deliver that well. So
Anyone else? Deborah?
That's very exciting. And so what databases do you see being linked? I mean, is it our education systems with DHHS, but is it also with juvenile justice systems, or our health systems, or
Yeah.
is there a
we'll do a
vision
visual.
right now?
Maybe we should have Dean at some point kind of do a visual of all those things, because this is kind of one small portion of that much bigger picture. But
Okay.
as you highlight, I mean, there's data that we are required to capture and collect for a lot of different things. So just like we were talking with food and nutrition, right? So that becomes part of the importance of understanding who's eligible for what sources. On the early childhood side, there's a lot of data that's required of us. But rather than have, hard barriers between, hey, look, this data doesn't get shared for that next step, it's obviously really important for us to be able to see that in the early elementary years beyond the early childhood side. So yes, there's a lot of those types of connections possible. Dean could probably lay that out, and that's probably a good point for us sometime to kind of see that vision collectively. It's even would be good for me, even though I'm in the midst of it sometimes, but forest for trees moments for me sometimes. So thank you.
If I could, Madam President.
Yes, Robin?
I can just see Dean, he's rolling his eyes
Yes,
right
he
now, and he's saying, how many times do I have to tell Stevens what we're doing? Anyway, yeah, that I think it's a great idea though, Commissioner.
Thank you, Robin. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Ricky,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Googles,
Yes.
Morrison.
Yes.
Gary,
Yeah.
Tim,
Yes.
8 yes.
Motion passes. Thank you, Andrea. 7.2, is there a motion on item 7.2?
Yeah.
Deborah?
I move to authorize the commissioner to contract with LVL Consulting for the purposes described in agenda item 7.2.
Is there a second?
Second.
Lisa? The motion was made by Deborah and seconded by Lisa. Is there any discussion on the motion?
Madam Chair.
Lisa?
I just wanted to thank the people involved in this. I think it's a wonderful thing that they've done to have more improved standards for principals and teachers. And I think it will help everybody in the process, students included, because of the improved leadership.
One quick question, Commissioner. And I probably read it. It's not coming back to me right now. LVL Consulting, where are they out of?
Yeah, I knew you were gonna ask me the hardest question of the whole thing.
I'm sorry.
No, I don't know if
If you don't know,
I
Ryan,
don't know
well,
off the top of my head. The work that's really being done underneath this particular contract is implementing, like Lisa started to address, when the state board passed those particular standards. This is actually work delayed by the pandemic. We probably would have been in the midst of this a little bit more had it not been for the pandemic. But going out and finding essentially underneath the contract arrangement, and I think it's a person's name, so I'm going to draw a blank on that. But the reality for us is getting someone to lead that work to ensure that those standards are being implemented, ensure that we're building the professional development system that's necessary. Obviously, we spent a lot of time on the leadership side, principal leadership side, in whether it's our priority school work or otherwise. But again, under the work of Dr. Vargas and Dr. Snyder, this has become a real focus for us to be able to implement those standards that the board passed.
thank you.
I can't see when my glasses fog up, and I can't see when I take my glasses off. Oh, okay, it's out of Colorado. Okay.
Okay, solid color. Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Jubals,
Yes.
Morrison,
Yes.
Bojangles,
Yes.
Stevens.
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Gary. Yeah. 8 yes.
Motion passes. 7.3, is there a motion on item 7.3?
Yes, Madam Chair. I move to authorize the commissioner to fund the ESU 1 pyramid model and early learning coach consultant.
Do I have a second? Patsy? Motion was made by Lisa and seconded by Patsy. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Andrea, please call the roll.
Gary. Yeah. Morrison. Yeah. Jubals,
Yes.
Ricky,
Yes.
Tim,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Stevens,
Yes.
Bojangles,
Yes.
8 yes.
Motion passes. Agenda item 8, there are no special presentations and discussions. Agenda item 9, board reports, dates, and discussion items. Thank you for those of you that submitted your monthly reports. Board members the reports are linked in Spark for your review, and I encourage you to review each member's report.
Madam
Jen-
Chairman,
Patty?
could you just, as new members, give us an idea of the types of things that we should be including in those reports?
Okay. Ryan, can I turn that over to you?
Sure. So you probably didn't know you were gonna need to even submit a report, right? And I don't know that was sent out for this meeting, with the thought being that in February, folks could report on the year from the beginning of the year till then. Board policy has some statement about board members shall report on their activities or their travel. And so it's an accountability measure for like in-state and out-of-state travel. The practice over the last couple of years has been to do those reports as written reports. And so board members would write up a brief description of activities that they participated in. So for example, if you went to an NASB area meeting, you would report on that, write up on that. If you'd attended the NASB conference, for example, you might provide a write-up on that. So there's a form for that. And now that we know who the president is for this year, we'll work with her to see what that format would take on for this year. So if I can say, if you haven't submitted a report for this year, I wouldn't be concerned about it, because any activity that you have in particular as a new board member, you could report on from yesterday till February. Looks like
Any reports that I submitted this week were from December.
looks like Deborah has a question. Maureen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. You know, I'm glad you raised this question because it's something that I looked into this last year and read the bylaws and policies. You know, why I'm not a fan of busy work. I communicate with my constituents in a variety of ways. And I found the actual report form to be just a challenge. I mean, it just took so much time. It was tedious. I felt that, but what the bylaws say is we really only need to report on, I mean, if we've spent money on travel, that's all that's really required. And so since you are going to be looking at that this year, I just kind of wanted to give input that I'm hoping that we can look at that and maybe make some changes to it, because it's such busy work and I don't understand the purpose of it, other than if we do travel, we certainly want to be accountable for those funds. But what it's turned into has been just time consuming. I go to so many meetings every month, and I'd rather spend my time in the meetings rather than doing the paperwork, for this unpaid board position. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Lisa?
Thank you for bringing that up. I agree. It takes a lot of time, and I would rather, just since we're talking about it, just if we've been to something during the month that we'd like to highlight and share, one thing a month from each board member for a minute or two, if that's an option. If somebody wants to share what they have done in a particular month, I would be okay with that. But spending the time, some months you run out, you've been to more than 11 things, and some months you might have only been to 3. It's busy work, and I would rather spend more time reading what I'm supposed to be reading to learn more about policy and digging deep into what the needs are in my district. So I agree.
Robin?
Madam President, just to chime in on this. First of all, Patty, you need to know that I've almost been removed from this office because I haven't handed all of the paperwork. And just so you know, this could be some pretty dangerous, you're asking some pretty dangerous stuff. Okay. First of all, Lisa, I think at one time, didn't the board do that where they had, I really didn't like that.
Oh, you did?
No, I really didn't. If it's between the two, I'd much rather just do the paperwork, because what happens is kind of what you kind of alluded to then. Oh boy, well, Patsy, she's our A student here, and she's gone to here, and she's gone to here, and she's doing all these wonderful things. Oh, here I am just talking to DSU board members or something like that. I don't know. I just found that to be more, I just didn't like it. And really, I don't know if I was ever involved with that, but when I was watching board meetings as I prepared to come here, that's what it seemed like to me, that so I don't like the idea of some kind of oral report, and if we have to do something, I'd much rather it be some kind of paperwork.
I have Patsy, Lisa, then Deborah.
I agree, Robin, that that's what happened with it, is that people would make a list that they were supposed to speak about one thing that happened that was meaningful to them. and describe it in a way that our constituency would say, well, that's great, we're doing good work. And it ended up being on the list, just 28 things that I went to and say thank you to them or whatever. And I agree that that wasn't good. However, I think the idea is good, but the protocol for it has to be established and then stick to it. If you have it, stick to it. It has, we have 2 minutes to talk, we have 2 minutes to talk. We do the same thing we do with people who come to report to us. They have 5 minutes to talk, we say 4 minutes, and then 5 minutes we say, thank you very much. And that's exactly how it needs to be with us. We need to follow rules, make rules to establish a protocol and then follow them. Lisa?
When I said report out, I've been to some things that I would like to share with the board that they might want to attend next time. I don't mean everybody, but if you've been to something that was outstanding and would benefit the board hearing about it, or you have some information to hand out to the board so that they know that it happens annually or monthly and they can also do it. It's a choice. And I agree, if we do that, exactly what Patsy said, we're on a timer. We have other business to move on to. Explain it in 2 minutes. If you have a handout, hand it out, or have whomever hand it out.
Deborah?
I just wanted to add, I would like to see the oral part removed from the agenda completely. Like, to me, it always felt like grandstanding. And I feel like if there is something that we've attended that's really important to communicate something about, isn't that at the end of the agenda where we're given an opportunity to bring up things? Otherwise, it feels, if it is on the agenda, it feels like everyone needs to, and I don't know that it adds a lot. Just my opinion for the record. Thank you.
Commissioner, can I offer something?
Or President.
Yes, I'm gonna get your permission first.
Anyone else have anything on that topic? Okay,
Can I offer a thought?
yes.
So I think that structure was probably put in place to give board members a level of accountability for travel expenses. I think that was probably the intent, I'm guessing. Based on how the board has been operating over the last year with having the Budget and Finance Committee review those expenses, you could view that as a level of accountability too, because you know that a committee is regularly, of the board is regularly reviewing that travel. So that's a thought as well. And so my recommendation to you would be to consider immediately having the policy committee take a look at that board policy to begin reviewing it for this year to see what you want to do.
Thank you, Ryan. Anyone else? Okay, at this point, before we go on any further into the agenda, we're going to take a 10-minute break. Is 10 minutes enough? Quarter till? 10:45?
Could you just
10:45.
Are we almost done?
We need a quick break. Okay. We're now at agenda item 10, information items and reports. 10.1 through 10.4, those items are information items and written reports for the board and for our information only. And as we start to look at adjournment now, I always, this past year as president, have put out there at the very end, is there anything for the good of the cause that someone just wants to share? And I will continue to do that. Robin has previously asked to speak. So Robin.
Thank you, Madam President. Before I start with my statement, and it's not a written statement, it's a statement from my heart, my emotion, my mind. But I do want to emphasize that it is my statement. It is not necessarily your statement. And I'm not asking you to make it any part of your statement. I visited very briefly with President Nichols this morning, and we talked about our emotions, about the things that are happening in our national government. And so I just want to, I guess for the record, state that that I just condemn what we witnessed on our television screens, and that as a state board member, I just want that to be known that that is not acceptable, and it causes me great, as I said, great emotion. I was listening also to the news this morning. Our former Secretary of State, General Colin Powell, said numerous things very eloquently, much more eloquently than I am doing right now. But the gist of his statement stated that he was seeking the president's resignation. I would like to just support that statement because I believe that in order for our country to move forward and to move forward quickly, that is a step that needs to be taken. And with that, that's basically what I want to say.
Thank you, Robin. Commissioner, if it's okay with you as president, I would like the two of us to work together on perhaps putting out a joint statement that would note what Robin has tried to share with us today, that I believe is all part of civics. So if you're good with that, we can do that and get it out in the near future here.
Yeah, and happy to work with you on that. And as folks know, just under board policy, the president actually can do those types of statements on behalf of the board. But we can talk more about how that would function. So,
Lisa?
Thank you, Robin, for stating that. I remember tears just flowed watching our house be stormed like that. And the next morning, I was thinking, we're trying to teach students how to civilly engage themselves in their communities, in their state. And here's a prime example of how not to do it. And I thought about teachers who are trying to address that, because students are going to have questions. And I've heard back from a couple constituents who are doing the homeschooling, not homeschooling, but the online learning. And she was listening to a teacher explain what was going on and said how eloquently that teacher addressed that. So I'm so glad you're going to put out a notice, a statement.
Deborah?
Yeah, I too always appreciate your statements. And thank you for doing that. It was very appropriate. But I guess I just, throw out the question of, there's a lot of things we haven't made statements on this year. And so a board statement, if you work on that, I guess I want to tie it back to, what's really within our jurisdiction of the work that we do. And I feel like to make a statement about what happened this week and to not point out some of the equity issues that were very apparent in that, and the way that protest was treated extremely differently than some of our Black Lives Matters protests this summer. I think that if we do make a statement, I really hope there can be an equity component to it, because to me that was also part of what was really ugly about that act. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out, Deborah. Anyone else? Thank you, Robin. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 11, adjournment. Oh, one thing, photos. Don't forget we're doing photos, board photos. Drew will take care of that right afterwards here. Thank you to those who attended in person and who tuned in to this broadcast. A work session as needed will be held on Thursday, February 4th at a time and location to be determined. A business meeting will be held on Friday, February 5th at 9:00 a.m. at a location to be determined. The January State Board meeting is officially adjourned.